Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Megan Billingsley from Retail Dive's Brand Studio, and I'll be your moderator. I'm pleased you could join us. Before we begin, we'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. At the bottom of your screen are multiple application widgets you can use. All the widgets are resizable and movable, so feel free to move them around to get the most out of your desktop space. Please note the slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button located in the top right-hand corner of your presentation window. Should you need technical assistance, click on the Help widget located on the bottom of your console. We encourage you to submit questions at any time throughout the presentation using the Q&A widget. We'll try to answer these during the webcast, but if a fuller answer is needed or we run out of time, it will be answered later via email. Please know we do capture all questions. Lastly, following the presentation, you'll be able to access the on-demand recording of the webinar using the same link from today's live event. In this webinar, we'll share insights from a recent Retail Dive Brand Studio survey of retail executives on what they have learned from the pandemic and its impact and how it will shape the retail industry now and in the future. Topics covered included how COVID-19 has changed the approach to the customer experience and omni-channel fulfillment, challenges faced around contactless operations and what's being done to address them, a look ahead at the future, especially as retailers head into the holiday season. On your screen is an overview of the methodology. Now I'd like to introduce Laura Heller, the host of today's conversation and our guest. Laura has been reporting on mass market retail trends and initiatives since 1995 as a journalist with B2B magazines, business outlets, and websites, including Forbes and The Week. She is the host of the High Tech Retailing Summit at CES and was the editor of Retail Dive. She has appeared on national TV and radio programs discussing retail trends, including CNBC, ABC News Now, and National Public Radio. Her blog, The Point of Purchase, appears on Forbes.com, and she's currently the director of editorial content at Publicis Health Media. Laura, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Megan, and hello, everyone. Joining me today is Christopher Walton, co-founder of OmniTalk, one of the fastest-growing blogs in retail. Chris is a leading expert in influencer and omni-channel retailing, an accomplished senior executive with over 20 years of success within the retail and retail technology industries. Chris has high-level executive experience across nearly every discipline within retail. He's our regular keynote speaker and a senior contributor for Forbes, and he also sits on the advisory board for delivery solutions in senior retail. Now, prior to starting Red Archer Retail and OmniTalk, Chris worked for Target, where he was the vice president of the retailer Store of the Future project, and also the vice president of merchandising for home furnishings on Target.com. And fun fact, when I was the editor at Retail Dive, Chris was among our most popular contributors, and you can still find some of his work in the opinion section on the site. Welcome, Chris.
Hey, Laura. Thanks so much for having me. This is going to be a blast. So excited to be here.
It is. It's like old home week here. Now,
exactly.
We're tackling one of the most popular terms in retail today. The term contactless retail is applied in a few ways, and so let's get a couple of definitions out of the way. There are many use cases today, but in general, e-commerce is the simplest form of contactless shopping. Consumers buy online and enjoy home delivery. Contactless payments is where a consumer simply taps their phone, pays by app. That eliminates the need to swipe a card or exchange cash. No touching, very popular today. Contactless stores like Amazon Go, where shoppers simply pick up items and walk out with them. Cameras are strategically placed around the store. They track activity, and the consumer is then charged via a card attached to a registered app for what they ultimately leave with. And BOPUS, very, very popular in our key topic today, which is buy online, pick up in store. And this option includes both in-store and curbside pickup. It's worth noting that some stores allow for a buy online and pay in-store at pickup, which opens this option up to consumers that qualify as unbanked. They have no debit card, credit card, or bank account whatsoever. And contactless is really the new buzzword in retail today.
Yeah, I think it's almost, I've been calling it the new safe word, Laura. Like, I think it's funny. It's kind of that new safe word that no one's quite sure when to use it. Like, every retailer's thinking, hey, we need to be contactless, but what does that really mean? And it can be a little uncomfortable if you're not quite sure the definitions. It's kind of funny too, because if you think about it, we've had contactless shopping even before e-commerce. I mean, the catalog even is a form of contactless shopping. If you stop and think about it, going back to the Sears and Roebuck days. And yeah, I think as you mentioned it, there's all the different ways to think about it, from BOPIS to say like an Apple Pay or a Samsung Pay or even a Walmart Pay, some degree like that. But yeah, we're going to start seeing it play, I think, in a lot of different directions. The other ones I would add too that I think are important for probably the context of the discussion we're going to have is scan and go mobile applications, like what you see at Sam's Club. We're seeing at 7-Eleven as well. And then even recently, just in the last couple of weeks, even voice is starting to enter that lexicon. 7-Eleven announced that you can now pay by voice with their app at a few stores. And Amazon has formed partnerships, I believe, as well earlier this year to those same ends. So there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice the coin. It's going to be interesting to see how it plays out here. And, COVID's just hastening them all, so to speak.
It really is. And many of these have been waiting in the wings, sort of poised to break out, right? Buy online, pick up in store was a big thing before COVID. And something that the nation's largest retailers were investing heavily in and building out an infrastructure to support. BOPIS was a big hit this past holiday season, with shoppers with 49% of consumers saying that in-store pickup was quicker than home delivery. BOPIS services may benefit traditional brick-and-mortar retailers by cutting down on some last-mile expenses and turning stores into a competitive advantage over online retailers, including Amazon. In November, an interview with CNBC, Target's CEO Brian Cornell noted that the retailer's costs dropped 90% when consumers utilize BOPIS.
Yeah, it's pretty significant. I mean, especially when you hit the nail on the head. I mean, at the end of the day, it's huge for the retailers in the sense that it defrays their last mile delivery costs. I think the funny thing about this slide is who's the 10% that hasn't deployed it yet? 90% are saying they're going to do it by 2021. And there's a lot of talk in the off-price sector of whether or not this is something they're going to go to. They've been hesitant to do it thus far. But yeah, it's just such a standard, almost garden variety thing at this point. And in reality, it's not new. I mean, we've had it for a long time. It's just becoming, so much more important. I think the point I would make as well here, just to start is, I hope we don't stop there. You talked about all the different ways we can have contactless retail, but there's still so many more things that retailers need to be investing in to take it to that next stage beyond just BOPIS, which seems like, honestly, the layup here in the short term.
Really, and there's on those 10%, right? I wonder, even in the last week or two, some of the smaller specialty retailers, even the mom and pops, have begun offering things in a real kind of catch-as-catch-can way that they were going to be, I think, probably building out in more depth as the year goes on. I've seen small neighborhood retailers simply by putting a sign up on their website, on their Facebook page, or in their store window saying merchandise is available, please call or text this number and we will bring it out to you on the curb. It's an easy way, even just for your neighborhood corner store, to provide services and sell merchandise today when they were shut down.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's really not anything new if you think about it. I mean, almost every takeout restaurant is buy online, pick up in store. It's just it's the same side of the same. It's a different side of the same coin, so to speak. And so, yeah, I think you're seeing people start to put that into practice, and it can be as high tech or as low tech as you want it. I would actually encourage retailers to go as low tech with it as possible from the get go, no matter what size and shape they are, because it can get more complicated the more tech heavy you try to make it. And as we'll probably get into this too, I think the inventory piece of that equation can become the sticking point too, especially as more and more orders are starting to go through that process. And what are the basically effects that start to happen in terms of you understanding what's in your store day in, day out, or in your fulfillment centers if you're also shipping to consumers.
This also indicates a big shift in priorities for retailers, right? So clearly, I think investment in physical space is now taking a back seat, right? This was a trend that was happening before COVID, but Chris, I'm curious, do you think this is a departure from pre-COVID retail when creating experiences were the priority? Experiential retail has been surpassed or supplanted as a buzzword by contactless?
Yeah, this is a fascinating slide. We could probably spend some time on here for sure. I mean, to see in like the one that sticks out to me on this slide is the 14% have revamped their physical layouts of stores. So, I mean, you talked about the experiential effect. Like, okay, I can buy the fact that we're not investing as an industry in, changes to the layout to make stores, quote unquote, more experiential. Because trying to understand what that means, I think, is pretty difficult right now. But what I think is more interesting about that is you actually need to most likely revamp your physical layout to be able to handle buy online, pick up in store. I mean, you talk to key leaders in the grocery sector that are trying to light that capability up. One of the things they talk about pretty resolutely is you need a lot more staging areas in your store to be able to handle that type of activity. You have to have goods waiting for people when they come and pick them up. So as the orders start to become more proportionate in that direction, you're going to need to do your architectures differently. So you start to ask questions like, where is the back of house? Where should the service station be laid out in the store relative to where that is from an operational perspective? So I think there's still a lot of questions on the physical side here that will need to be answered. But fortunately, retailers can get pretty smart about how they want to do that, given the sense that many of them have been metering traffic into the stores. They can kind of control their hours in a different way than they have in the past. So there's room to experiment with what the right answers are. But I would expect if any of the slides in this deck, I would expect that number to go up, or at least it should.
And here's a stat that I was surprised to see, that 33% of those surveyed said nothing has changed.
Right. I think some of them are still just trying to figure out how to open. I mean, I wonder how many of those are the mall and specialty apparel retailers too. I mean, those guys are in such a hamstrung position in terms of how the business models have always operated. And you get into this almost, what I worry about with them is you get into this almost quagmire effect of, who owns what in this process, right? Like if I'm a specialty retailer in the mall or department store, who's coordinating curbside pickup or buy online pickup in store? Is that being done at the mall level? Is it being done at the retailer level? Oh, and by the way, I have to figure out all these other issues in terms of how do I safely run and operate my stores? That's a lot to sort through, and it's a lot to sort through in a couple of months. So you could see why some people have probably, remained stagnant. But I think to your point, right, it's kind of interesting to see that large of a proportion of people haven't done much at this point.
I think you're right. I think a lot of people are simply frozen in place and deer in the headlights, don't quite know how to proceed or how to even implement some of the simpler solutions, which, frankly, when there's confusion, there's opportunity, right, for some solutions provider or someone within an organization to step up with a creative solution.
Yeah, and I've talked to many specialty apparel retailers, for example, where they've said we just don't know who to go to for this. It's almost like pick your specialty retailer. Let's use Gap as an example, but ban them all together with whoever the core crux of mission critical activity is in a given mall and make it happen. And then you've also on the flip side got malls like a Kimco that's trying to be a leader and put these capabilities into place, or the Mall of America, for example, in my backyard, trying to put these capabilities in place. But if somebody has to lead, which is in general I think a big theme during this pandemic overall.
They do. And here's, on our next slide, we queried whether retailers actually believe contactless services matter. And, overwhelming majority, right? 89% say yes. They said a little 11% are not at all concerned about providing contactless services for customers. I wonder if some are, maybe deprioritizing programs and not paying as much attention as they should to some contactless solutions. Customers are going to have the ultimate say here, right? As the pandemic drags on, some people are voting with their wallets and will continue to order online and utilize a variety of delivery methods. But getting them to utilize all of your options is going to be a priority going forward, don't you think?
I do. And I've been on record as saying, I think for Grocery Dive, that, I think this period of time is the greatest experimentation hall pass in the history of retail. So the biggest hang up retailers have had with a lot of the technological innovation that's been talked about for the last few years is you have the customer adoption problem. But now you can actually invest in these types of things and see what people gravitate towards under these conditions. I mean, what's unique about that is if you look at the types of things we're talking about contactless, at the core, there's usually good business model rationales for them, that they're saving you money in some way, shape, or form. We talked about last mile. Well, we talk about Scan and Go Mobile or Amazon Go style systems. Those take away payroll at the store level, so they make them operationally more efficient. So there's always been a desire for retailers to do them. The hard part has been the customer adoption. But if you actually look at them and study them, they're also a better way to shop. So if you can get customers to gravitate towards them, over time they will say, you know what, I will choose this option because it's faster and more convenient. And that's a universal truth. So what you have is kind of the intersection here, I think, kind of the Venn diagram of it's a better customer experience in a lot of ways for many of these things. It's better economically for both the customers and the retailers. But now you have this third element of safety that's forcing this adoption in a different way. In reality, I don't think it's that different than the airline industry, like what they went through, after 9/11 in terms of self-serve kiosks. If you remember back to the day, they would have the kiosks and the line, and you talk to the people that were putting in those places. They put the kiosk there and still had the line, even though they didn't want the line. They wanted everyone to go to the kiosk, and over time, people migrated that way. I think you're going to start to see that happen here as we go, where it's going to be, well, oh my gosh, I want to do everything possible over time, say 10, 20 years down the line, not to have to wait in those lines by way of these technologies. And you're seeing Walmart do cool things like that. They just did their self-checkout only store, or not only, but a full self-checkout process, at the end of the line for how that supercenter works in Fayetteville, Arkansas.
Yeah, and there's a dedicated Walmart pickup location near me in Chicago as well. Mm-hmm. It's pretty interesting. They've been playing with these things for years, right? These were investments that were in the pipeline. And so it'll be hard to beat if you're a retailer that hasn't been that far along in this process. But I have to believe that there's like third-party platforms that are going to benefit from this new trend. The marketplaces like Etsy and Walmart and Amazon are going to become more popular, and Shopify, which can possibly help Shopify sellers implement new systems and new features more quickly if they didn't already have that infrastructure, and that the marketplaces will provide also those opportunities for smaller sellers as well. Especially I'm interested in this going forward for holiday 2020, right? Any specialties or small retailer that didn't make the investment in digital and all of the accompanying contactless options, should be looking at some of these like now, right?
Oh, I think so. I think 100%. I mean, to your point, I mean, there was rumors just this week or recently that Amazon's going to move Prime Day to October. Imagine what happens in that case. Like the Black Friday that everyone used to know is kind of thrown asunder. And then you have the fact that people can't line up at the door like they used to because of, again, what's happening from a safety standpoint. Then, yeah, these are the things that people either need to be investing in more fully because they already had the projects in flight. You look at like how a Starbucks, Best Buy, Walmart have been doing things, or even if you're a mom and pop shop, yeah, there are small players that can help facilitate these types of transactions and make them come to life very easily for you, like, again, with a low lift on the tech side.
Yeah, it's worth looking, right, at what we have currently in terms of contactless offerings. This next slide talks about the types of operations that retailers are currently providing. And there is some type of contactless operation offered by 87% of the respondents. Payments, home delivery, curbside, drive-through. Again, I think that you pointed out, who's that small percent that isn't today, and where are they going to fall?
Yeah, I think that's a big question for a lot of the industry. I think that specifically the off-price segment. I mean, you've looked at just what like companies like Burlington and TJX have stated in their statements lately to the media. They've said, you know what, we're going to run with stores. They feel like they have I'm guessing a lot of inventory at a great value coming through their networks right now, and that's traditionally how people want to shop. The treasure hunt environments. But time will tell. It's going to be interesting to see. We're starting to see some, I don't want to say surges, but increases in the virus overall. And so, will people have that predilection to shop those retailers as they traditionally have? I know the demand's been really pent up there too, so it appears so in the beginning. But as we continue to go here, it's going to be interesting to see how that segment specifically plays out along the lines of that question.
I think so too. And here I just we have the benefit of having had Q1 sales reported for the advent and the onset of COVID and the shutdown, and you can see how early numbers show the growth of consumer adoption, right? Just the Sam's app added 700,000 members alone in the first quarter as people were using that to order and then pick up or order and delivery. And, Target reported a 500% growth in both the sales in 2019 in total and 275% e-com growth in Q1. I think that, and they're adding more items every day. And grocery, of course, has really benefited. And they went from, Kroger's suspended the fee for curbside, and some of those third-party curbside providers, that usage has really exploded.
Yeah, and the crazy thing about these statistics, when I look at this slide, is they still have a ton of room to go. I mean, the studies I've seen coming out of the pandemic, I think Fabric released a good one early on, which was, what percentage of Americans have tried e-grocery? And I think at the time it was 52%. I've seen some revisions in other studies where it's now 60%. So that still means 40 to 50% of Americans haven't tried e-grocery. And that means direct to consumer. It means buy online, pick up in store. Like, that's massive. And so if this continues, you're going to just see this more and more. And you alluded to one thing that I think is really important within that context of that conversation. I mean, there's two issues that really hold that back. Number one, you've got, older generations of people who are maybe not as technologically affluent as those that are younger. But I think that's becoming less and less of a problem as people are forced to shop this way. And then the other thing that's really critical, you talked about the unbanked, but also for anyone that's a SNAP recipient or is on the WIC program, those, for the most part across the United States, are not eligible to be redeemed online. Now, fortunately, they can be with buy online, pick up in store, and you see companies like a Kroger and a Walmart, really marketing that to what I think is, quite honestly, a wonderful effect. But once that gets unlocked as well, there could be even more volume that starts to surge in that direction across all of the states.
That's a really good point. And it speaks to something you said a little bit earlier in our conversation about the off-price retailers being reluctant to get into this game here. And once we see that shift to, in terms of what you say, SNAP recipients and some other in the unbanked populations that comprise a large proportion of their shopping base there, I think it's going to change that whole game.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's also, I think, the other technological innovations I think I would add there to bring into the conversation that we haven't yet is also there's a lot happening in the installment payment space too, in terms of how people are just paying for things online day in and day out, where you can basically, like companies like a Split It or a Sezzle or somebody like that, where you can pay for things on 4 easy installments. A Klarna, lots of partnerships being developed in like the apparel space where, hey, you want that shirt? Well, don't pay the normal amount for it. Fit it in your budget and you can pay for it over time. As all that starts to open up, it has a different budgetary impact on how people can shop and what they can spend. And so all these things are coming to a head at the same time.
That's really interesting because it particularly, I think, benefits specialty apparel retailers, electronics retailers, shops that sell more than household essentials and food items, right? And so those payment systems, to the benefit of that shopper and that particular sector of retail, really stand to see some growth here.
Yeah, it's funny actually. I didn't even think about this at the time. The first piece I ever wrote for you when you were editor of Retail Dive was actually talking about Affirm and Walmart's relationship, and imagine if grocery bills could be paid on installment financing plans. And yeah, if that ever can happen, then things can change pretty significantly.
It really could. And looking ahead, right? We, the top findings here really shouldn't be much of a surprise, right? But it's sort of surprising that just 19% are looking at changes to the supply chain, and a full 21% don't expect to make any changes at all over the next year. I'm curious about your take here. The supply chain and the fulfillment issues have already raised their ugly heads currently. Some of the largest national retailers have really struggled in the first few months of COVID to meet demand, and where these changes need to be made. I'm curious where they're going to fall out if this statistical stands.
Yeah, I think this is probably the $64,000 question in this thing, and in this presentation. I mean, I think, and we've talked about it to some degree already, but you can see people trying to invest in e-commerce. E-commerce is the trend, but honestly, that's kind of the first wave of the trend. There's still so much more to come based on what we've talked about. And the question that I really worry about here, again, I'll go back to mall and specialty as the example, is, what is the role of that physical store play? So when you see that only 24% are reassessing the role of the physical store, that's interesting. That's intriguing to me. Or 21% don't expect any changes. What is the reason why, those stores exist? Because if you buy into the argument that e-commerce will continue to grow, well, then if I'm a given specialty retailer, then I as a consumer can get your product in store the same way I can get it online. And that is, deleterious to you from a margin perspective. So you have to give the consumer some other reason to come to your store to shop. What is the answer to that? Why? And you're seeing this, I think, and already start to play out. And so, we talk about the retail apocalypse. To me, it's more of a retail reckoning, because the retailers that are not able to answer that question are now starting to fall by the wayside. You're seeing the bankruptcies start to happen. And I think the real next challenge is probably department stores, because department stores really don't have a role in answering that question anymore for us as a consumer, because so much of what they sell, we can get online. You mentioned Shopify. We can get online through so many other platforms with so many other options. And I know you're a huge Instagram fan, and in ways that are so much more inspirational than actually going into a Macy's that is, not like we used to know it in the past.
That's true. And a look to the future here, we're looking at some fundamental shifts, right? And not just in how the shopping experience plays out, but in what consumers are valuing. The hygiene and the personal safety, as it, jumps to the top of the list here, is really very interesting. Retailers, I'm happy to see that 73% of retailers say they will need to approach holiday sales differently than before. So they are thinking about it and looking ahead and not so frozen in the headlights. And that 66% of customers say they'll prefer the use of contactless services even after the threat of COVID passes. And that's something I've been wondering about. How sticky will these experiences be? How many people will both use and then and then continue to use all of these contactless options? I think one thing that's interesting to see, it seems a little crazy to be talking about holiday sales in June, especially with so much uncertainty, but I'm wondering how you think events like Black Friday will play out. They've been shifting online for years. And we talked about that a little bit earlier. Can you think of any good examples that might provide a model for Black Friday 2020, or for the season in general?
I think this is the time the U.S. retailers have to look overseas pretty hard. I think the model's already there. Look at what Alibaba does on Singles Day and just how much volume they drive through that type of activity. And that's the place that I think is really unexplored in the U.S. And so I would point to live stream commerce, for example, or social commerce. How do you take the fervor almost of Black Friday, mash it up with what you can create with a flash sale like a Way Day or a Prime Day, and make that unique to your brand, to say a Walmart, a Target, or whomever, and then leverage all the different omni-channel capabilities you have within that construct. So say, hey, limited time only on big screen TVs. Here it is. Be the first to order it. You come in, pick it up in store, buy it online, pick up in store. We'll have it shipped to your house. What are those different things you can do? But you could literally have daily events geared towards that. You could literally have hourly events geared toward that if you can get the infrastructure set up in time. But you're going to have to do something like that to defray the risk of the fact that you really don't know what you're up against here. And so I think that's just a smart mitigation move at the end of the day.
Well, customer adoption has really been the big barrier here in the years prior, right? So the biggest challenge that's been facing retailers, even those that had contactless operations, was that there's no real consensus on what the greatest challenge they face in omnichannel fulfillment is, right? There's no single obstacle that's selected by more than 1 in 5 retailers in this question that we asked. And we know it takes a lot to fundamentally change consumer behavior. And given the high number of shoppers trying BOPUS and other contactless methods, what do you think of these numbers?
I think these numbers right here, when I look at these, I think these are realistic. I mean, there's definitely challenges here. I think when I look at it though, I think at the end of the day, like I said before, like this is the time to experiment. I think the customer adoption argument to me kind of gets thrown out the window because I think you get the chance to try something new. And especially if you're a retailer in a precarious position, like what do you have to lose? Like the option value of it to me is almost too strong not to try something. What I think is important to see in this data too is the fact that there's also the important elements of how do you just operationally do it and how do you do it well. So I actually think you're more on the likelihood of seeing consumers gravitate towards doing something new, but the risk is if you don't do it well, they might not like it, and that's where I think there's even bigger issues that retailers have to still figure out what to do about, specifically on like the inventory side. The point of sale systems and how their order management systems connect all in real time to make these things happen, day over day over day. That's what the really good retailers who are good at doing this right now and have been fast to the market with new ideas have been able to do.
Now, another question mark here is how are retailers going to make up for the lost additional in-store purchases that people make when they buy online and they pick up in store, they come in store and they're picking up the spontaneous items, right? And according to Retail Dive, as recently as February, just a month before the COVID lockdown, 85% of shoppers said they made additional purchases when picking up an online order in store. If you're doing curbside pickup, if they're bringing it out to your car, a lot of that gets lost.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It does. It probably does. But I think there's ways to look at every problem as an opportunity. And so, like, for example, I love what Sam's Club has done during this period of time. So I think it took them 6 days to launch this, but Sam's Club launched a concierge service for disadvantaged customers. And the way that worked is the customer rolls up to the Sam's Club, designated spot at a Sam's Club employee comes out and basically takes their order with an iPad. Essentially a mobile device. The customer just says what they want. They write it all. They enter it all into the iPad. For Sam's Club, it's great because they know the customer history. They understand who it is. They go in and shop it. The average order, they say, takes 16 minutes to process, and then they're on their way. But through that, you can do a whole host of things. You can recommend new product, but most importantly, it's just a different way to interact with customers. And that's what's important. It took them only 6 days to do this. There are other things like that you can do. You can do concierge itself. I think we've talked about this a little bit, but if you don't have as many store employees or the store employees are sitting idle because you don't have as much traffic in your store, well, how can you enliven text-based commerce? There's companies like, I think it's a Numa that are doing interesting things in that space where just give the employees the capability to talk to customers and help them out and see what kind of new products and whatnot can be inspired to purchase through that way. Give them the autonomy to do it. Again, now's the time. And then, like I said before, too, I think you can get into other ways to connect with people digitally by way of live stream commerce or by, working to create those experiences from an omnichannel standpoint that you haven't had before, whether it's curbside or concierge.
Well, consumer-facing challenges are one thing, but fulfillment around omnichannel is another entirely, right? It's long been a thorny issue for retailers and particularly for online orders. And I think the pandemic really laid bare just how big of an issue it was. Shipments arrived in bits and pieces, delays of weeks, sometimes months were common. And the internet was alive with customer complaints and lack of transparency. These questions, the low response rates on some of these are interesting to me. I have to wonder where retailers are really focused on trying to fix some of these issues.
Yeah. It is interesting how they're like all kind of evenly spread here on this slide. I mean, I will say this till the cows come home, based on my background of trying to invent or been tasked to invent Target's store of the future 5 to 10 years out. And I've asked key leaders at Sam's Club and Walmart the same question, and unfortunately I've learned the same answer, which is the single most important thing is that you have to have real-time visibility to what's happening throughout your network. And that comes through cloud point of sale, coordinated with a great order management system. If you don't have those two elements foundationally in place, you are going to struggle. So you need to start making your investments there first and foremost. Everything can be built off of that in the long run, but it has to start there.
Well said. Well said. I feel like in this next question, it's hard to top that statement. Yes, the visibility factor is everything. And retailers have faced a lot of challenges since the shutdown began, right? Reduced store traffic is mentioned most often, but it's clear that retailers are fighting these battles on many fronts, and they were before and they still are. Protecting employees is something that really stands out. And it's something that has arisen out of the pandemic, which is that, retailers are being called to task to really care for their employees and are answering that call in a variety of ways that go way beyond higher pay or hazard pay, right? And contactless services really help in that regard and can be a real point of differentiation here in many ways.
Mm-hmm. No, I think like anything, I think any problem is an opportunity. I think the beauty of this, especially if you're a physical retailer, is that it can give your stores another reason to matter. I mean, what I think this has shown us at our work at OmniTalk too is that physical stores play a role in the community. They're places that people trust, and how the employee works within that construct matters. And so what I typically advise people, and I really believe in this, is to say, before you do anything, ask yourself these questions. Number one, what if you look a year and a half out and you say, you know what, our stores are never going to be open, or they're never going to be open to the degree that we thought. What decisions would we make, and how would we think about things differently? And then if you double click into that and say the next question is, okay, everything we choose to do, how do we know it's making life better for the employees that work in our stores or our fulfillment centers, and better for our customers? I think if you step back and take that approach to what you design and what you try to implement, chances are you're going to come into a good situation, because you're doing the things that matter for the communities that those retailers and those employees serve. And that's really important to think about when you talk about the long run differentiation plan against e-commerce, or specifically the big elephant in the room, which is Amazon.
Right. And, we talked a lot about how the pandemic has really shown a spotlight on problems and hopefully revealed some solutions. And these are some of the bottlenecks that retailers are saying are impacting the customer series beyond just COVID. It's behind the scenes is really critical for execution and all of these things here. Home delivery struggled in terms of fulfillment and stressed the customer service operation. And BOPUS is an opportunity to refocus on the store, even if it means meeting the customer at the curb and that store doesn't get to open.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that there's so many things here too that can impact the quality by which a retailer can give a good customer service, according to this slide. I mean, you're going to see the bottlenecks happen. I think the other aspect of this that I would add to it, or the layer, would be, everyone's working in different locations right now for a lot of retailers too. So you've got remote workers, and how you communicate and coordinate these different activities is not something that's easy to do. So you take about, just the challenges that come along with that in terms of how to operationalize, everything quite honestly we've been pontificating about today. But part of that, algebra needs to also be, what are the back office processes that we need to make more efficient within the context of this conversation? Because we can't let the back office preclude us from doing what we need to on the customer and employee facing side of things too. So I think that's where you look at, things like, what are the accounting systems that we need? How do we expect store managers and district managers to communicate with each other and communicate on up to headquarters? How do we make things like that as efficient as possible? So like, how do things like Slack, for example, as a great process or technological tool start to enter the everyday lives of retailers at every level of an organization? Those are things that I think people also need to be spending some time on.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point about people working from home and all sorts of various locations. Enabling customer service solutions that allow for those different locations. I can't tell you how many customer chat lines were closed down. During the peak online ordering process of April. March, April, May, there was no online chat option for some of the nation's largest retailers. They just hadn't enabled that from remote locations or couldn't handle the volume.
Yeah, and my favorite personal anecdote, it's funny, I've been spending a lot of time on this topic lately. I think it just happens by inertia as you start to see the impact and kind of where does your brain go or what interests you. And I think even on the accounting side of things, I've been hearing stories about how, we used to have just all these Excel spreadsheets about how to meet our financial reporting deadlines, and we'd walk them over to each other's desks and share them. But I mean, if you've ever tried to send an Excel spreadsheet over, email to many people that aren't all working together, that's an insane process. So you've got to have ways, to make that more efficient, or else, it's going to become a real hamstring for the organization. And especially when you've got a lot of retailers sitting in precarious positions too.
Yeah, it's a real opportunity, I guess. And I think that retailers, good news, there are lessons being learned, right? But
yes,
they are many, and these answers are very spread out. Of course, there's preparedness and safety and hygiene, but this slide just sort of says it all in their own words. And I love how there's patience is right there with 2%.
You got to have patience. Oh, and then 30% are just like, oh my gosh, what do we do? Right. Right. Which, hey, I can feel for that. I mean, there's a ton of empathy here because I think this is just such a hard question to grapple right now. And I think we're all trying to figure it out, just even in our home lives or even how to operate day to day within the retail industry.
Yeah. And so many of these problems are so, specific to customer-facing businesses. These are very personal things. You see retailers are saying they're prioritizing family and personal life. Customers have been, tempers are high, right? And the need to meet everybody and be prepared for something you never saw coming is it's quite a hurdle to go for.
Yeah.
But, we've got. I have some key takeaways, and I just really was heartened to see that all of the e-commerce investment that has been made in the decade past has really paid off, right, when it was needed. By and large, operations continued on, and customers really got product. If it existed, of course, there were some product shortages, but that had little to do with the retailer or their supply chain. And this recognition that customer service is more important now than ever. And, there's this real need to implement systems and programs to keep that up in a contactless way. It's not just face-to-face anymore, and it won't be for quite a while. And I'm happy that I think smaller specialty retailers have a real opportunity here because they already have that personal relationship with their customers face-to-face, and now to continue that online, digitally, with delivery or focus for their own organization. I really have to think that that's going to help some of these smaller retailers if they persevere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a good. I agree with you on everything you said, Laura. I think to me the 30,000 foot view takeaway that I have from just the conversation over the last 45 minutes or so has been that the bias to action matters here. That now's the time to try new things, and in some ways that levels the playing field for the small and medium sized businesses because they have the opportunity to make those personal connections in a way that feels safer and and more natural and almost altruistic in a way versus, how maybe things have traditionally been done. And the technology platforms are out there now, like you mentioned, Shopify and all the different things that can connect with that to make it happen. That stuff is real. And so I think when you step back and you say, what are the big takeaways? It's the companies that have already thought about redefining the role of a store within the construct of omnichannel retailing are the ones that are winning, and it's starting to pay off. Where the store isn't the first and foremost aspect of the retailer's brand expression. That in reality, in the most cases, it's now becoming a secondary or complementary way to how retailers talk to their consumers online. I mean, the other thing I think you're going to see just an incredible rethink, and we've talked about it a lot, of how the mall is going to be done in terms of how the department store industry and the specialty industry starts to play out. And like you said, I think it's going to come down to how do they start to embrace technology, and really someone just kind of steps up, and leads that exploration, for the good of the mall, to try to find economies of scale in general that aren't there prior to when all this happened, or that were not there prior to when all this happened.
Yeah. And I think you brought up the need to embrace technology, and I always wonder, could this be the year that virtual reality finally breaks out, right? It's been a solution without a problem, but, it's maybe finally got a problem to solve, and one that would really benefit mall operators specifically, and specialty retailers in general.
Oh my God, Laura, we might not have enough time for that one. That's that one's always been that's one on my do not touch list. I'm like, I don't see that yet. I think given everything we just talked about, there's so many inroads of better places to invest your money right now than trying to get people to put VR goggles on as a replacement for physical stores, especially when discretionary income is a question mark. I always joke, I'll believe that one when porn takes off mainstream, because I think if any industry has an attitude for VR, it's that before retail.
Oh, yes, well, and now I think we can hand this back over to Megan and tackle a few questions.
Fantastic. What a relevant and insightful conversation. Thank you both for your insights. It looks like we have time for a few questions, and we have a few from our audience, so let's dive in. Our first question is, how can smaller retailers, even mom and pops, provide some form of contactless options?
Now, Chris, I'm going to let you tackle this. I think I've touched on a couple points, but I'm really curious as to what solutions you've seen out there available.
Yeah, I think there's a number of different companies out there. Like I think I mentioned some of the ones that have been coming to mind in my work. Like there's a lot of advances happening in kind of the text commerce space. So I would do an exhaustive search there. But I think companies like Enuma do some great things in that space that can help get small and medium-sized businesses up to speed pretty quickly on that capability. Another company that I love a lot right now, I'm paying close attention to, is a company called Shopgate, where they'll come in and set up buy online or curbside pickup services very, very quickly. So I would advise those companies to be looking at those types of things where it's just, real simple and easy, but they're out there. You just got to look for them.
And I also think that, you mentioned earlier my love of Instagram for shopping. And I think that it's another great moment for social shopping. Some of the more innovative solutions I've seen came from, again, small mom and pop shops that they didn't have an online presence. They don't have a web store, and they didn't try to launch one. But what they did was they took pictures of inventory that they had, put it up on Instagram, and simply by commenting sold and through DMs were able to transact. And I think that and send it, or if it was a very local sale, many of them were hand delivering and dropping them off on people's doors with pretty packaging. So there was an unboxing experience involved, and it felt very personal and very special. And I think that if you can, myself included, I felt that paying a little bit more for something from that person under those circumstances felt great, and I did it more. I was more likely to do that than just simply look for the best price and convenience.
That's a great point, Laura. We probably didn't talk about that enough, but I mean, when you look at some of the announcements over the past month or two with Shopify integrating with Facebook Shops and now with Walmart potentially too, that gives you a lot of different outlets as a small retailer that you didn't have before if you're set up to do that, 100%.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you. Okay, our next question. What do you think about the concept of dark stores, and how do they fit into today's increasingly contactless environment?
We've been talking about dark stores in retail for quite a long time, and they've been utilized, I think, in other countries previous to this. But currently with the overstored situation, the closings, the lack of needs for some of this real estate, I think there's a real opportunity to use these stores for order fulfillment, if not even just for your own retail operation, as part of this marketplace platform service that you provide for people who are selling on your platform if you're that large. I'm curious, Chris, where you come down on that.
Yeah, this is this is one of my favorite topics. Actually, Kroger made an announcement that they were taking one of their stores dark really early on in the pandemic, and I wrote about it for Forbes. And the points I was trying to make is I think it's a really smart thing to do. Like, if retailers right now have a certain geographic density, I would be experimenting with this. But I want to be clear on what I would be experimenting with. What I'd be experimenting with is, what is the economic impact it really has for you? So the big topic that we didn't talk about is really there's a move towards hyper-local fulfillment in the grocery industry specifically, which is, how do you basically pick and pack on site or near a site and then get closer to your customer from a last mile perspective, but use tried and true methods of automation to make it happening, like Takeoff's a good company in that space, for example. Now's the time to use dark stores to see if that's an answer for you as a retailer. Because you don't necessarily, otherwise you're not going to have the time to do it as quickly, and other people have already been putting those types of things into process. The funny thing about dark stores, though, I will say, is I don't think it's necessarily ultimately the answer. A dark store is really just a fancy name for a distribution center, in a specific location, or say a more urban or dense location. It's really just a closed store that acts as a warehouse. And so I think figuring out, one, what can you do with that, but then also still thinking about, okay, how do you take the lessons learned from it and start to incorporate it on site or co-located at your site when you do start to open things back up, or are able to have the capital to put those type of operations into play. That's where things start to get really interesting.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. Our next question, how are retailers staying connected to their customers in contactless environments? There's a real concern that customer service is suffering. How can we be both contactless and personal?
Well, that's the $100,000 question, or the $100 million question, as it were. I had mentioned earlier, I think that online chat is really important here, and all the mobile tools that we have at our disposal to get in touch, to create, and to open up a two-way conversation digitally, specifically for younger shoppers. I think that works really well, right? The digital natives who would prefer to text than speak. But I think that it's time really for retailers to embrace these tools in ways that they maybe haven't before.
This is one of the most exciting things to me in retail right now. I think there's this misnomer that physical retail is not as personal or connected as digital retail. And I think, Laura, you brought up great examples where, actually, if you start thinking about the social sphere with Instagram and what social media can do, that actually really does start to feel personal. And then the other place that I think gets really exciting, and there's a company that I was talking to a few weeks ago called Automat that's experimenting with this, where it's conversational AI and commerce, where, historically browsers have always been about kind of that hunt and pick mentality, right? That's how Amazon's set up. It's a search-based business. Well, what if it didn't have to be that way, and instead you could use technology to give you the same approximation of great service online that you would expect in a store in a way that was much easier and much more frictionless? You talked about digitally natives and text. If it could happen that way, then for sure that might be a faster way to do things. I mean, I know that's how I handle all of my transactions through Nike now, where it's all just text conversations through what they've got going on, and it's pretty slick. So there's a way for things to merge, and you're seeing a lot of new apps in this space, like the Yes is going in this direction. How do you reimagine the department store with this angle I'm trying to talk about? It's unfettered ground, and again, now's the time. Now is the time to start to look at those types of things. Because there's a there, as a buddy of mine likes to say, in terms of how do you create a more personalized experience online where really the human interaction is not necessarily that much of a requirement.
you think we might actually move beyond simply pushing items that have been left behind in your shopping cart or something you've looked at elsewhere and just reserving it to you in many, many ways across many, many platforms? Is that kind of personalization? Because what we've meant by personalization up until now has been fairly weak, in my opinion.
100%. Yeah, no, I think you'll see website design, front-end design start to change, where how we interact with the website will change on the front end before we've even purchased anything. And so as we start to understand who consumers are, whether it's through conversational commerce and questions that we ask, or things of that nature, we can get a better sense of who the customers are and serve them up the right things from the get-go. And then the standard personalization engines on the back end still are important, but coordinating all that data with kind of what you're browsing and what your psychology is, all of the contextual analytics that can be thought through in the design of how that can all work is still so untapped and so unexplored. I mean, I'd say we're only in the first inning of what that could look like, but it means something. Like, there is a connection that you have in social media that you don't have in other ways.
Now, wouldn't it be ironic if this rise of contactless retail actually spurred a more personalized contactual relationship than we had before? I just made up a word.
Yeah, or is it even right? Right, as writers. I mean, is it even ironic, or is it actually just the hallmark of what retail has always been about? It's like, what is the right thing to do at the right step in the process for your customer on his or her journey? And so digital, what we're saying is that there's so much more ground to mine. And then on the physical side, it's saying, okay, where does that matter, and why does that I think this is where retailers get hooked, or kind of fall back to, is where does the human interaction actually matter, and why is it there? And let's augment that, because that's great. But just to assume by default that it matters, that can be problematic.
Yep. Well, on that note, thanks for all of your insights today, Chris.
That was awesome. It's so much fun to do this with you.
Awesome. Well, that is all of the time that we have today for questions. We'd like to thank everyone for joining us. If we were not able to answer your question, please know that we do capture all submitted comments, and someone from the team will follow up via email. As a reminder, the recording of today's webinar will be available via the same link you accessed for today's live presentation. We also encourage you to check out the resource list to download any materials that you may find useful. Thanks again to our presenters, the sponsors of our conversation today, DXC America and Fujitsu, and of course to you, our audience, for joining us.